Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to go sharp into the Sudan. So this is a review of Go Sharp into the Sudan, which is a Sudan supplement for Sharp Practice, which was put out in the 2021 Lard magazine, which I've been playing a few games of this year. In fact, I painted up these British sailors for that occasion and got completely stomped, teeth kicked in, royally smashed in the first game with them because they're brand new painted, which is of course what happens. Anyway, Go Sharp into the Sudan is a specifically Sudanese, the Anglo-Sudan War, Martyrs Rebellion, whatever you want to call it, 1884, 1885, British intervention into the Sudan. So it's not for the later period, the sort of on the run or whatever it is with the British coming back with the bolt-action rifles. This is very much a Martini Henry, the last black powder war, because of course the smokeless cartridge was invented in 86 by the French. Anyway, that's way beyond the scope of this. So, if you haven't seen one of these before, 5 good things, 3 maybe not so great things, not necessarily in my opinion, but 3 things that the community in large might not be the biggest fans of, and something that makes it special. If you haven't seen it, I've done a review of Sharp Practice on the channel as well, which I'll put in the description below, which you can check out if you want to check out Sharp Practice as a system, and then this as an addendum to it. So, I'm assuming people know the basics of Sharp Practice just for this. Number 1, I really like the way they've done the breech loading era rules. So one of the problems with breech loaders is, of course, you can always shoot them. Because if you have to have a reload marker, well then how long does a musket take to reload compared to a breech loader? Now your musket troops have suddenly got 2 or 3 markers for every one. It doesn't work. It stops working. So breech loaders don't need to reload. You just fire them. But at the same time, they're very expensive. So now you've got very expensive troops that can always shoot, but once you lose them, you've lost a quarter of your army in a single unit. It's like, okay, well, how do we balance that? And they've done a really good job. There's a new fisticuffs table, which sort of doesn't penalize you for losing so much, in that you've got to lose by more than 1. It's sort of shifted a bit. It's a bit different, which is good because it means a lot of the time units will just sort of bounce off one another rather than sweeping one another away, which is good, which is what you want. The first game I had, the Mahdi's came right over this big hill and hit a British unit, which quickly formed a little triangle, and spent the next 7 or 8 turns bouncing off one another, to the point where they were so full of shock that it basically came down to the last dice roll, and some Bashi bazooks on the other side shot one person and then won me the game, which was great, for me anyway. But yeah, so you get this real feeling of grinding, trying to break a square, grinding attrition. The Mahdi's have the no bayonets rule. So they're not so good in combat, but there's so many of them, they're so cheap, and they've got fervor from the... if you played a lot of Infamy, you'll sort of get the fervor mechanic and the mob mechanic. They've really melded a lot of that with the ambush tokens. They really have melded a lot of those rules into this game, which is really good and fun. The British are always ready, so you don't need to worry about, well, I'm going to get charged. Oh, I prepare. That's what I do before I get charged. The way you would in a Napoleonic game. So I really think they've done a phenomenal job getting the period feeling rules very good. The first game we had, great fun. Came down the wire. Anyway, I won't go too much into that game. That was a lot of fun. And then another game we had, I got completely stomped, as I said. If the Mahdi's get up on you, they're up on you. You've really got to get your stuff together as the British and start putting lead down range, otherwise you're in trouble. Which is, of course, extremely accurate. So any rules that give you real-world circumstances normally are a pretty big tick in my book. Games are very different than normal Sharp Practice games, which is always good when you're playing the same system and you get a completely different game out of it. So in normal Sharp Practice games, you have your lines will normally start shooting at one another, your skirmishes will move around a little bit, and eventually you'll get into a gunfight, which you'll either break by trying to move away into cover or charging the enemy. In Go Sharp into the Sudan, your British are basically being charged, and you have to deal with that while completing the objective. So the game we played first was an escort mission. So it's like, I've got to cross the table. But at the same time, I've got to stop these Mahdi's getting me. How do I do that? Well, I park a Gatling gun, and then I lay down covering fire, while a small force moves out, and another force sort of moves behind in a protective formation, so that, if they get in trouble, they can always fall back. Which is not the way you'd play a sharp practice game. It's very different because you're not worrying about shooting so much, if you're either player, really, because if you're the Mahdi, you're getting shot at. That's just happening. You can't stop it. You can mitigate it by, using cover to block line of sight and that sort of stuff, but, you're going to get shot. And if you're the British player, you're not too worried about shooting coming back at you, because it's generally not very good. So you're more worried about how do I open up my fire lines and how do I move. So it becomes a much more dynamic game, a lot more movement than you would see in a normal sharp practice game, which is great, because it's the same system and it's giving you a completely different style of game, which is a huge bonus. Number 3, the use of the fervor system. It's so simple, but it's fantastic. When you deploy your Martis units, each of them gets a thing of fervor, the same way that a unit would in Infamy, which is basically, it adds extra to their run. It's sort of shock that you can take off before you take off shock. If you get in combat with it, it helps you. It's a great thing to have. Perfectly represents the way the Martis, get themselves hopped up before battle. It's really great. And the British shooting isn't too overpowered. You're really not throwing too much shots down range, and I tend to like the prepare fire myself to give yourself more chance of hitting rather than double firing, that sort of thing. I think that sort of prepare and fire works a bit better in my experience in these games. It's great. The British shooting isn't overpowered. The Mahdi's fervor system helps them to get over that first 1 or 2 rounds of shooting, because you're going to be in the open at some stage. And without the fervor system, what would happen is you'd get in the open, you'd take 1 or 2 rounds of shooting, you'd end up with like 3 points of shock on each group, and suddenly you're done. You got to spend, okay, I'll get the shock off. Oh, but they're still shooting at me. What am I going to do? I've got to hide somewhere and take all the shock off and then come back out. But with the fervor, you can basically absorb that and then get in the enemy. I don't think we've had any units get into combat with a lot of fervor. Most of the fervor seems to be taken off as a shield by shooting, which I think is probably the way it was designed, which works great. And it means that your shooting is still useful in that the thing you're coming at you is weaker, but it doesn't paralyze the enemy the way it would in a normal sharp practice game. Number 4, the flexible drill. This is something when I first was told about this, I'm like, oh, well, I wonder how they're going to do that. But basically, your normal line infantry can become skirmishers. So everything's in a unit of 8. All the infantry and the standing units of 8, but you can deploy them as skirmishers if you want, and then during the game you can bring them back into a line. And the skirmishers can retreat back to your friendly units as you normally can. I think it's great. The flexible drill system really does solve that issue of having dedicated skirmishers in a period where they didn't really have dedicated skirmishers. What if I'm at long range and I want to, spread out a little bit and do some shooting instead of, forming up and marching forward? You can. What if my skirmishers are suddenly doing some shooting and then Mahdi's surge? I think we had an insane, I think it was like an 18-inch surge in one turn, 3 6s roll. It was crazy. Over this big hill, and suddenly what was once a skirmish line is now faced with a whole horde of Mahdi's in front of them, where you form up. It's really simple. And I think flexible drill solves a lot of problems that a lot of colonial games have, in that you're sort of balancing that firepower with melee potential, because you need the British were actually quite good in melee, superior to the Mahdi's anyway, which is a problem when the Mahdi's are only fighting in melee. But anyway, that's a whole other situation. But I think the flexible drill is fantastic, and it really does fix a lot of those issues that you can foresee arising. Number 5, it's sharp practice. It's all built on the sharp practice system. It's sharp practice at the core with a few things added onto it. That's a really great bonus to me, because sharp practice is designed to be a system that you just play different periods with. And I think this should be seen more as it is an expansion, but not the way you would normally see an expansion, the way that, was it Shakos and Bayonets and Muskets and Tomahawks are an expansion. I think this is really just what it is. It's a magazine addendum to let you play a new set of rules. But it's sharp practice at its core. If you know how to play sharp practice, you know how to play sharp into the Sudan. If you know how to, if you know how to do the basic stuff like calculate shock, do casualties, measure the ranges, leader stuff, you can play this game. So having a system that you can just, my friends have been playing a lot of Napoleonics, sharp Napoleonics, which is really fun. I bought a bunch of these cool miniatures that, look like this. Would you guys like to have a game? Oh, sure. How do we play? And you go, well, it's just sharp practice with these few rules here, which is always an awesome way to introduce people to games. And it can be the difference sometimes between playing and not playing, just having that core rule set. And it's a fantastic core rule set, as you'll see if you watch my other review on it. So that's a big plus in my book. 3 things that are a little bit, off, not necessarily my opinions, but 3 things that people in the general community might consider a little bit off. Number 1 is the card activation system. This is something that's in sharp practice. There's no getting away from it. You draw cards, activating leaders, getting the flags, and the Tiffin card. I think it's a fine way to do things. Some people really don't like it. It does have the potential to basically create a game where only one player is actually playing. In that, there is a chance, however slight, to just draw blue the whole time and red the whole time and that sort of thing, which can be a bit of an issue. And I know people don't like card activation systems, which is, that's fine. That's their opinion. So that's the first one. Number 2, it sort of dovetails with that card activation system, but sometimes it really can become an issue of if the British shoot too much or the Mahdi's don't get shot enough, it can be a very short game. We had a game where, I'll put some pictures up here. I would have more pictures, but I didn't have a chance to take any more because the game was finished. Where basically the British just couldn't get their damn cards out. And by the time they had deployed to save this little trading village on the Nile there, this trading post, the Mahdi's had completely swarmed them, and it was over. So if you've got to get your troops out and shooting, which can be a bit of a problem. And if the British spend too much time maneuvering, not enough time shooting, that's something else that'll lose you a game pretty quick. So I suppose the number 2 would be it can go downhill very fast if you're not careful. So it takes a little bit of practice, a little bit of prioritization to get things done the way you need them to, much more than a normal game of sharp practice would. You really have to sort of get your early game figured out, if you'll forgive my Age of Empires 2 rhetoric there. Number 3, which is kind of the opposite of that, is that games can get very drawn out. Now, I'm a huge fan of long games that come down to the last dice roll. I know a lot of people are, but some people really hate it when you've got these units here who have so much shock that they're doing 1 dice each to one another and the game's just never going to end. Which the first game we played ended up being like that, where the British and the Mahdi's were basically just coming in and rolling 2 or 3 dice each and then just going back from one another and, oh, well, I lost another point of my force morale. What are you at? Well, I'm at 4 and you're at 3. Okay, we better do that again. Which we thought was fantastic. We thought it was the greatest thing in the world, was that this little British square, this little British triangle that ended up being, in the end, I think down to like 6 guys out of 24, was just standing there and the officer was wounded. He was on the ground all dazed and all this sort of thing. And they were fighting off, and then the Bashi Bazooks came at the last minute and fired some shots to send the Mahdi's away. Great fun. Some people really get frustrated when a game's just bogged down by pin tokens or that sort of thing, or fatigue. And that can be a bit of an issue if you're playing in the Sudan. It can be a bit of an issue. So yes, if you're not a fan of long drawn out potential, it might be a bit of a problem. So what makes the game special? Well, I think what makes it special is that it's unlocked sharp practice for the colonial period. With very little modification, this is a Zulu war game. With very little modification, you're suddenly on the northwest frontier, shooting at Afghans. You're the French in Vietnam. I would actually like to see Europeans versus Europeans. I mean, you could do up some French profiles and some German profiles and Franco-Prussian War, or that sort of thing. Like, I think it wouldn't be too hard to take. Maybe Franco-Prussian War might be a bit trickier because you've got Europeans versus Europeans. It'd be a bit harder, but certainly British versus colonial troops is very easy. Afghans and that sort of thing. It's unlocked it. I think the breech loading rules are great, and the breech loaders was really what was holding up the expansion into that breech loading era, because they're just so damn powerful. But I think Sharp Practice has really done it, and I think that this system will be. I hope that Rich and the guys are really going to expand on it. That would be fantastic. I recently got some of those Wargamers Atlantic Gurkhas for some reason, because I bought them with the subscription that gave me all the files, and they were in there, and I printed off 64 of them for some reason. So it'd be nice to take those up against some Afghans on the northwest frontier. Similarly, things like, French in Vietnam, dealing with the uprisings they had there. Maybe you could stretch it out to the boxes. Using bolt action rifles, not necessarily breech loaders, but you probably fiddle with that a little bit. I think the big special thing is it's unlocked that sort of, not really the colonial period, but the Victorian colonial period. The breech loading era has been unlocked for Sharp Practice, and I think that's fantastic. So that's been my review of Go Sharp Into the Desert. If you haven't already, I would like you to check out my Sharp Practice review, because, more views for me is more good, and I think it's quite a great game that you should definitely play if you haven't already. Certainly for miniatures, Perry's got you covered. Perry's got a bunch of stuff for the Sudan. Elite Miniatures, if you're in Australia, that's where I get my stuff from. Great stuff. Depending on where you are, you can normally find miniatures for the Sudan. It's a fairly popular period. The Perry Martists, I've got 200 and something of them. They're fantastic. They're great. Easy to build. They're all white clothes, black skin, done. For your British, you've got different uniforms. I went for the grey for my infantry because they look cool, and then I've got the sailors there in the dark blue with the little neckerchiefs and all that. So it's good fun. It's a colourful period, so you're not stuck with your khaki uniforms, although you can if you want to. Red jackets also come in, and you got your camel corps with the cool uniforms and camels and all that sort of thing. And the Mighties have all these patches everywhere if you want to put those on. So it's not a boring period, and it's certainly a lot of fun to paint up if you want to go that far. So anyway, that was Go Sharp Into the Desert, which is in the 2021 Lardy magazine, which is worth it just for a flick through anyway. Great magazine. They're always worth it, those Lardy mags. So thank you very much for watching. Have a wonderful day.